So starting off, we're going to start talking about security roles and security controls. A lot of these topics will be in a setting of a enterprise setting. So just keep that in mind, but they can apply to small business as well. So in topic one, we're going to talk about comparing and contrasting informational security roles. So anytime you're talking about informational security, you're going to run into the CIA triad, and that stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, when you break those three things down, you're going to see that we want to keep information secure, keep it from people who don't need to see it. That's confidentiality. We want to make sure that it is correct at all times. That's having the integrity of it. And then we want to make sure that it's accessible to the ones that need to see it. Going back to the integrity piece of it, we also want to make sure that if anybody does change it, we want to make sure that they cannot deny it. And that's our fourth point here of non-repudiation. But in a business standpoint, you'll have a triad, a triangle type of a diagram, and confidentiality, integrity, and availability will be on each side of the triangle. Now, in some businesses, we may want more confidentiality than availability, and in some we may want more integrity than we do availability. So it all comes down to what kind of business that you're in and how you would form that triad to make things secure. Now, once you got into informational security, it's not just necessarily putting a configuration on a firewall or making sure that you throw your antivirus up there and scan for different files. It's a number of things that all go into protecting the data that you want to protect. Security is built to make the business run more securely. It's not there to chokehold the business to where it doesn't is not able to run functionally. So different things we may implement while performing security throughout our day-to-day tasks may be risk assessment, maybe coming up with disaster recovery plans or security training for our employees. We may be checking audits and making sure that the configurations are put on those systems that need to be there. So it could be a number of things that we have in place, but it's not just technical. It's a more of a business standpoint than anything else, with some technical aspects sprinkled in. Now, in your typical setting, you will have different roles that are in the security department. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a chief security officer, or sometimes they may go by a CISO, which is a chief informational security officer. 9 times out of 10, you'll have a manager or a technical manager that's right under them. And then you will have your analysts and your interns that's kind of doing your grunt work, so to say, in order to place those configurations in building policies and so forth. Now, it's the job of your analyst as well as anyone to actually do their due diligence and their due care when it comes to the business needs, and then what type of security we're going to actually provide the business when it comes to the operations that we're actually running in our business. Hey, before we move forward, I wanted to show you guys kind of like where you can look for some security roles and some positions that are hiring for informational security jobs. So I'm here on my LinkedIn page, and I'm going to go to jobs up here, and I'm going to um, just kind of scroll through to see what's going on. The one reason why I like looking on LinkedIn for jobs is that they actually take your profile and then kind of cater the job search towards your resume that you already have, right? So if you're already in the IT and you have that built up, then it makes it easier. But if you're not, let's say you're trying to break into IT, it's real easy to come up here and then cater to the search to be in that area. So I'm gonna just scroll down and you're seeing, some security roles. You'll also have like this. These are all roles that you see in the security department team. Um, all of them are just not analysts or managers. They could go under different names where a compliance and operation manager will probably look over the policies and make sure that everybody's compliant, but also they might look at how we're actually doing operations to making sure that the operation, security operations is actually helping out the business in day-to-day functions. Um, Scrolling down here, I like this post right here. Informational Security Analyst 1 is out of Indian Land here in South Carolina. And I'm just going to click on that. And what I like to do is you can read this here on LinkedIn, or if you're on Indeed, you can read it on their website. But what I would like to do is just kind of go out to the actual website here and then read the application here and see what they want. Now they'll go through, and you got to keep in mind that when HR is building out these descriptions, sometimes they may hit what you actually are working on, and then sometimes they'll give you a high level overview of what you may be doing. But the one thing that I always go down and look for is the description. What would I do daily on a daily task? And then I will also go down to the requirements, the must-haves here, as they put it. But these are kind of the requirements that you need. So as a level 1 analyst, you'll need that 1 to 3 years of experience in IT. But we already discovered, and by saying that, informational security is not necessarily an IT field, it's more of a business function, and then we understand how to apply security to the business functions. So keep that in mind. But it's centered, a lot of people think that it's centered around IT. So going down, you'll also see what type of things that make a top quality of a candidate, right? So they say that the security, plus certification would definitely put you as a standout. And it's always good to have, good to know about, you know, um, having the certification to back you on your resume. In some cases, your business may not be able to have a full department dedicated to just informational security. Um, Sometimes you may have the third party that source out and make sure that you check in with them when it comes to the security aspect of your business. Um, Whenever you're seeing more of a center that's dedicated to security, informational security, then it's 9 times out of 10 it's going to be called a SOC, Security Operations Center. You also have teams such as DevOps SOC, which is more like your developers who also implement security as well as the operations of the business, all developed into one, making it a whenever we're building applications, we're thinking with security in mind. And then you have a incident response team. This could be referred to as a CSIRT or some type of incident response team. If you take a look at the slide here, you'll see how the manager pieces, more like your CISOs and your security managers, they're sitting at the top of the pyramid. So you can imagine that more policy decisions, how the business is ran, and then how we're going to implement security around it is made at this level. And as it goes down the operational and the technical side of it, this is where you get your more managers and your analysts involved in actually pushing out the security configurations, policies out to the individuals and making sure that we are actually following those steps in order to become more secure. Now, when it comes to the actual operations of um, being attacked or putting things in place for an attack, um, we have function types. And here, explained here, we can see that we can either prevent, we can detect, or we can correct. And preventing is you're going to deal more with actually putting things in place to stop an attack, to mitigate an attack, or to just eliminate it all at once. Detective, we can actually just kind of sit back, see what's going on. We will go over that more in detail in further courses about what type of technology that actually is just sit back and why do we want to just sit back and learn from different tactics that attackers may be using. And then we have corrective. How do we actually, turn around the actual action that has been taken upon us? And we also want to know what happens, what we need to do after an attack. If we're actually hit, okay, how do we recover from that? So to continue on that, security controls that we can also put in can be physical, and we can have deterrence, and we can have a compensating control. So a physical control will be more like your security locks. You can have fences put up. We can have security guards with a actual TV at their desk so they can monitor everything. Those are examples of physical controls we can always put into place. We can have deterrence, things like signs such as, stay away or beware of electrical shock or something like that. Something that we can put up and we can make noticeable to anybody who would want to cross the line, come into the premises where they're not supposed to be. We can deter and actually discourage them from going through with their actions, right? And then we have a compensating control. Say we would just accept the risk that happens, and we're just gonna say, hey, we can't stop the typhoon from coming in, but so what we'll do is we'll make sure we have insurance and we can recover from that if we're actually hit by the natural disaster. It's always important to understand what type of business and industry you're in, just to know what kind of framework that you might want to use when it comes to implementing information security into your business. So you want to use these frameworks because they're good foundations to actually follow and to make sure that you're compliant if you're doing any type of business. When I say that, I kind of bring up the example of just using credit cards. If your company is collecting credit card data because you're actually doing transactions of sales or e-commerce, then you might want to make sure that you have the right framework in place in order to stay compliant and making sure that you're not breaking any laws. So a good framework that you can actually get into is looking at what we have in NIST, or seeing what other cybersecurity frameworks that we have out there. Sometimes finding a international organization of standardization can help you bring those frameworks into play and actually see more in depth on the type of security that you need to apply for your business. So a good example of that is the Cloud Security Alliance. They have a good certification with the CCSK that can help informational security professionals understand how we're putting data into the cloud and how to keep that data secure in the cloud. So they can provide you with cloud matrix and cloud control matrix, where it kind of gives you this layout of things to look for, questions to ask your provider before you actually just give them data. So it's good to look these organizations up, see what kind of standards that they have out there, and then apply them on your day-to-day basis when it comes to security. Having a good benchmark is showing that you have done your due diligence when it comes to seeing how your business operates, and then how we're going to actually apply security to it. Having said that, we can use something such as the Open Web Application Security Projects, OWASP, to apply the configurations that we need when it comes to web browsing and making sure that we stay secure when our clients are out there browsing the web. So that takes us to regulations and standards. So having those regulations and standards put in place, again, is showing that you have due diligence. You've done your due diligence. You actually taking that step forward in order to protect the data that's in your business, protect the operations that we're actually doing. A good example of this is applying things such as your SOX, the FISMA Act, making sure that we're in compliance with GLBA, HIPAA, as well as PCI DSS. Now, all of those standards are in different fields, but we need to make sure we understand what type of industry that we're in, and then if we fall under these different types of standards, regulations. Because if we break out of the standards that are there, then it's a good chance that we could be held accountable in a court of law. So as a key point to remember, starting informational security, we started talking about the CIA triad and how, we're going to use those three different pillars in order to secure our data or make it available or making sure that it doesn't change by any means. We also talked about the different types of roles that we have in our business, when it comes to informational security, who's sitting at the top with the CISO, and then we have security managers that's pushing out to our analysts of the configurations and the regulations that we need to abide by. We also talked about the different standards and the different regulations that we need to also abide by when it comes to making data secure, but also making sure that we're in standards and in compliance of the legal laws that's been placed on our business and our industry. So let's jump into lesson 2, threat actors, and then actually gaining some threat intelligence. This is where we're gonna, go a little bit deeper into who is exactly attacking or sitting on our network, and then what kind of intelligence can we actually gain to protect ourselves against these type of attacks that they're gonna put on us. So before we get into threat actors and intelligence, let's understand what is a risk. Risk is having a vulnerability and a threat present pretty much at the same time. If they're present at the same time, then the likelihood of the risk actually happening is very high. If they're not, let's say if they're not in the same vicinity at that point in time, the risk level will be low. A good example would be if you're in Idaho and you have a building that's made out of straw, then the risk factor of having a hurricane come and hit your straw-made house is low, right? But the risk factor for it getting hit by a tornado is high. So the vulnerability will be the fact that the straw house can be exploited. It can be broken into very easily by high winds, right? So, but the threat of certain actors, in this case, will be in the hurricane. The hurricane is not going to make it to the middle of the United States. So therefore it's low when it comes to a hurricane, but yet high because tornadoes are common in Idaho, right? So we just want to make sure that we understand that whenever a vulnerability is there for, let's say, a server, for a different example, and then a threat, a hacker is out there and is snooping around the network, the probability of the risk, the probability or the likelihood of being hacked, that risk is very high. All right, so we want to make sure that whenever we're taking a test or we see anything when it comes to informational security, if you have any two of these equations, then it will lead to the impact of the risk. And if you remove any one of these factors, if you remove a vulnerability or you remove the threat, then it pretty much eliminates the risk. Okay. Attributes of a threat actor, it could be a number of things why a threat actor would choose your business, your data to be a potential target. It could be they just simply don't like what you stand for, what you bring to the table. It could be the simple fact that you just left configurations open, and they're, let's say, sharpening their skills for a bigger job. So it can vary on a scale from you're very popular to I need to work on something, so I'm gonna work on someone that's not as big on the net. So you fall into that area. It could be I have a target audience. I'm going for anybody who is a baby boomer. I'm going for that older audience. It could be I work for a competitor and I'm wanting to, drive traffic over to my product versus my competitors. It could be I'm an internal person that turned rogue and now I'm going to expose the company for the truth that needs to be shown to the public. So it can be a number of things on why threat actors are actually in it to actually pose a threat to your data. So with that being said, let's go into hackers, script kiddies, and hacktivists. So let's start off with script kiddies, just because they're kind of, to me, they're the forefront. This is where people kind of start off, where they are not, they're not so great in hacking, or their hacking skills haven't gotten up to par yet. So they will go out there and pay for an actual disruption, a executable that they can plant into a server or some type of PC or any device for that matter, and create a DDoS attack on that device. So these are kind of plug and play type hackers, right? So they're getting things that's already pre-made. They have no idea what is it doing, or how is it made. They just know that it works whenever they double click, right? So that's your script kiddies. Your lone hacker is going to be someone that's more seasoned, maybe having their own agenda, being able to actually be employed by somebody, and being able to keep a white hat, so to say, during the daytime, and a black hat during the night. And that's kind of a cliche analogy, but when it comes to wearing different types of hats, you have a white hat where I'm strictly doing things by the book. I'm not going rogue and looking at things for my own personal gain. And then I have a black hat where everything that I'm doing is against the law, and I'm doing things for my own personal gain, or I'm doing things because I'm hired to do so, right? And then you have that gray hat where I think a lone hacker will probably hang out at the most, right? So they could be employed by someone, but look at the misconfigurations of different types of devices within an organization, and maybe put that black hat on just to kind of make some money on the side, or prove a point. You never know. So again, going back to the attributes of why are these people doing this type of stuff, it can vary from threat to threat, right? And then you have your hacktivists, your hacker teams. These are people that are probably going to get into a political sector, and they're actually going to do some social engineering to make massive moves to steer individuals in a direction that they want them to go. The most recent one that I remember is probably the 2016 elections, where we had a slew of people claim that the votes were swayed into a certain way. And so hacktivists were behind that type of movement, and then it caused to really shape and shift the world in a when you look at the whole grand scheme of things. So to kind of stay on the hacktivist standpoint, and kind of moving into APTs, APTs are probably the most I would say seasoned threats out there. They're probably sitting on your network for years at a time, and they're just there to collect that data, right? So a lot of times you'll see these highly sophisticated hackers not even being discovered in most networks. Most businesses do not realize that they actually have someone there already collecting data. A lot of these groups are state backed, so they're actually state actors. You'll hear a lot of terms correlate with that, where they're actually paid by an organization to collect data, right? And do that data mining, and figure out what's the data flow when it comes to what's going in, what's going out, what things are you planning to do with your business. And these APTs are just sitting there watching the whole thing. I heard cases where they'll sit there for 6-7 years before they actually are found out, and then um, you have to, escalate things immediately, and then put out public statements saying that, it's believed that we've been breached, 5 years ago, and we're just not coming up with that today. So keep an eye out for advanced persistent threats. Those are, you're pretty much your advanced hackers that are just sitting there collecting data. I kind of touched on the insider threat actor a little bit, but this is just pretty much, an employee of the organization that decided to go rogue. Decided, for whatever reason, that the private sector of the company needs to be public, right? Whatever they have access to, they decided to either, bring it out to the public's viewing, or maybe sell it on the dark web, whatever they decide to do, because, and they don't have a necessarily reason why. Well, I can't say that. They don't have it's no particular reason on why you would create an insider threat, but it does happen, and it could be from a various of reasons of, they may not like the way someone talked to them at work, and then now, since they have access to the whole payroll, then they decided to show that, uh, this is the payroll for 2022, and they're gonna make this public, and now that creates this type of buzz around the company, right? So this is your insider threat. It's always important to have policies in place whenever we bring someone on and we actually offboard someone. Let's say if someone quits abruptly, that may be a telltale sign that they could be an insider threat, a malicious insider. So we need to put things in place in our policies to make sure that we take assets away immediately, making sure that we keep things on hand so many years after that person hasn't left the building. So just keep that in mind when it comes to insider threats. So let's talk now. Let's talk about the attack surface, or the vectors that hackers are using to get into our network. Um, think of our network as a kind of like an invisible wall that we have around our data, our important data, right? So I'm not talking like a physical wall, like the brick and mortar building that you actually go into, but the visible wall that you don't see, that's protecting our data. So it's by firewalls, or putting out there on a DMZ, things of that nature. But it's ways to actually go in and then come out, right? So when you go into your office and you log in, and then when you leave out to go to when you leave out and go to the internet, that's leaving out, right? You're leaving outside of the safe confines of your network to either bring in information from, let's say, Google Drive, or we're going to post something on social media. So that's information leaving out. I'm going to post something, or I'm bringing something in. I went and downloaded it, and now I'm bringing it into my invisible fence, and now it's in my network, right? So that's what I want you guys to think about when it comes to an attack surface. What is the ways into your actual network? And then how are we getting in? What are the vectors that we're using to get in? Is it direct access? Can I just walk into your building, sit down at your desk, and you don't even have no login screen or anything like that? You're at lunch, right? So can I log in and just go to work and start seeing what's there and what's not there, right? What do you have saved on your desktop? What's in your documents folder? Can I just plug in my USB USB stick and pull that off? Can I send you an email? I think by far the most popular way of doing it is just kind of sending a fish email. Why not? You see it every day. You get it every day in your spam email. So it's obviously it's working, because people are constantly doing it, right? They're constantly sending it out. Um, can I just talk to you on social media? Have you posted something on social media that you shouldn't? You know, um, these are certain ways that you could gain information about a company just by reading, what people are actually posting on social media. I talked about the cloud earlier with G Drive or Google Drive, where that's considered the cloud, right? And I can go out there on any device because the cloud is pretty much everywhere. I don't necessarily have to be in your building. I can take it from there. Um, so there's many different vectors, and that's knowing these things is a good way of saying um, having an understanding of how data flows in and flows out. So we went over, attack vectors. We went over, who could be possibly doing the attacking, and then now let's find out how can we arm ourselves, right? And I think the best way to arm ourselves is with knowledge and being able to research how are they actually doing attacks in the wild in real time, right? And this is when we are wanting to get that type of intelligence on our threats. So we can arm ourselves better by saying, okay, let's put these things in play because this is what they're doing. If we're protecting ourselves and they're not even doing that anymore, is it is it, are we wasting time and money by focusing in places where we shouldn't be? So one way we can do this is we can put things such as a honeypot out there for individual to go in and attack. And when they're participating in this attack, we can sit back and monitor how they actually are doing their attacks. And then we can record all of that stuff down, and then we can have our smart guys at our application department write our application to be aware of the attacks and then put things into um, actually defend against those attacks, right? So that's why we would have something that's sitting out there that looks vulnerable from the get-go. So it may be a server. Let's say we put a server out there in the DMZ. This is kind of like a no man's land where we can see it, but they can actually get to it as well. So we put a server out there and we name it payroll server. Do not enter, right? And of course, that's obvious and it looks like the obvious thing, but I'm just giving an example. Someone logs into it and they go to, performing their ritual of how to figure out what's open, what's not. They're running their tools on this thing, and only thing we're doing is we're sitting back recording all of the data that they're doing, right? So it's kind of like, just if you remember a show called Bait Car, where they just kind of left the car unlocked, and the robber will come in and they'll drive off a couple of feet, and then the cops will jump out and arrest them. It's kind of that same concept, right? We're putting something out there, we're realizing how are they actually just attacking, and then we make the countermeasure to that. Another place where we can get good information is from the vendors that we have in our network, right? So all the devices that we have or the software that we're using in our environment, why not go to their website to see what type of technology that they have in place, what type of updates are they pushing out to see how they're actually combating against the attacks that are heading out there. It's real good to see, especially when new attacks come out there that are very fresh. The latest one that I've seen was Log-J4, and we had to pretty much go to every vendor that we had, every device that we had, and see at the vendor's website, were the configurations or the software that we use for that particular device, was it vulnerable to Log-J4? And we had to update those things constantly in order to figure out if we were what type of vector was a new vector for us. You understand? So where we did not have a vector into our environment, it created a whole new with this vulnerability. A vulnerability showed up. It just so happened that A lot of software uses Log4j, and a lot of our devices became vulnerable just like that out of the blue. And so it's always a good thing to go to these vendors' website, stay up to date to see what they're talking about, and see if you're actually see how they're actually fighting against things in the wild. We already talked about tactics, techniques, and procedures the way when we were explaining the honeypot example, where we would watch to see what they're actually doing in the wild. And then when we're doing our research, we're also understanding how attacks are actually being, performed, right? But we also want to make sure that we understand what are the indicators of a compromise. How do we know that we have been compromised, or it may be a good indication that we are probably compromised. So you want to look for, unusual outbound traffic, things that are going out in a mass amount of traffic leaving the network. You want to also be aware if you have traffic coming in from areas that you should be blocking. So a lot of traffic from China, a lot of traffic from, let's say, Germany, well, let's say South America. If you have a lot of traffic that's coming in from these areas and you normally don't have that, then it's a good indication that something may be up. Is there any kind of explanation to user accounts being used for the wrong things? Can you see any type of misuse of privilege accounts, right? So those are privilege accounts, or those are accounts that have admin access maybe to throughout the network, or maybe to certain particular PCs that have great value to them. Do you see any kind of unusual activity to those type of user accounts? Is there a type of, any type of rise in databases being read at a high volume? If there's only a particular threshold that we have for reading data on our databases, and then all of a sudden it spikes through the roof, what's the cause of that? That might be cause to raise some questions there. We also see kind of like a high request for important files, sensitive files, confidential files. When you start seeing people who shouldn't be snooping around, who are snooping around, these are good indications. So it's a good way of having these type of indicators in place, and being aware of them is a good indication to it's a good way to understand if you've been breached and if changes need to be made. But don't worry, you don't have to necessarily put your face in literature all day and read upon how things are actually being worked on here in the wild. It's good to do those things on a daily basis, but we can also have machine learning out here that understands the daily workflow of our business, and can tell you, can alert, and some can even mitigate if things go awry, right? So if anything was to be abnormal to the normal workday, machine learning or artificial intelligence would be able to detect and then warn us to say, hey, this doesn't look right. It's a lot of traffic leaving out, or a lot of traffic coming in. We're being bombarded here. So it's always good to have these tools in place and making sure that they're configured right to help us stay secure overall. So in summary, we went over threat actors, we went over the vectors that they can come in, we went over how can we do some research in order to better arm ourselves against the attacks that they may be placing upon us. So I would definitely go back over and make sure that we dive deeper into the type of procedures that we want to have, the type of due diligence that we need to do within our company to make sure that we apply the due care in order to avoid attacks from insider threats or people who may be APTs that's sitting in our system, right? And so making sure that we stay knowledgeable about how they're performing their attacks will help us in the long run when we see things go astray. So in lesson 3, we're going to start talking about performing security assessments. So as a security professional, sometimes we take network tools and actually see how traffic is moving from point to point on our network as well as outside of our network. And we need to be aware of the type of tools that we use in this types of scenarios, and then how can we use them to our advantage, and then also how can an attacker use it for their advantages as well. So the first thing we want to get into is opening up our command prompt and then typing in an ipconfig command to see what type of IP address that we get. And this is I want you guys to think about an IP address as kind of like your home address, right? So in order for you to receive mail in the physical world, the post office will give you a postal address, right? And in order for someone in New Jersey to send you a letter, they need to have that address, and then it goes from post office to post office until it's able to go down your lane, your driveway, or what have you, and then into your mailbox. Well, the IP address is similar to that, right? Where your router is sort of like a post office, and it will assign your devices an address. This in case it'll be a IP address, and it uses that IP address in order to communicate to other devices within the world, whatever it may be, from a server to gaming consoles to your smart refrigerator that tells you how many degrees your milk is chilling at, right? So we can use an IP address to identify each other on the network, or in this case, the internet, right? So we can also use things kind of like a what's called a ping. So we can open up our command prompt, and I'll show you guys in a second. We'll open up our command prompt and we'll ping another address or a domain name, and it can return to us their address. So let's say if we wanted to know the IP address to the server for ESPN.com, and what we'll do is we'll ping ESPN.com. It'll show us the information there. So I'll show you guys that in just a second. To go back to our analogy of, how you actually have a physical address within the real world, and the post office will give you an address to receive and to actually deliver mail. The same thing in the computer world. We can route different ways of getting to different destinations, and in your computer it keeps this things and call what we call a routing table, and we have all the different IP addresses that we are familiar with, and then new ones that we verify and we understand that this is who they say they are. We put them in that routing table. We can also use our command prompt to show us trace routes, and that's kind of like what I was saying before of just showing the logical hops that a packet takes from your PC all the way to a receiving server or gaming station or what have you. So again, I'll show you all those things in just a second. Now, as security professionals, you will run across these things called a IP scanner or Nmap. What they do is they actually scan your network. You'll sometimes hear the terminology crawl the network. And what they do is they actually kind of do like a ping test or a more in-depth conversation to whatever device that's on that network, and it pulls information from it. So it will say, hey, I crawled the network and I see that there's 10 actual phones on your network, cell phones, and 5 of them are Android, and then the other 5 are iPhones. And then it can even get more granular by saying, hey, I found a PC on your network. This is the operating system that is running, and these are the ports, the communicating ports that are open to this PC. So it's very important to understand that we can use this as a administrative tool, right? We can make sure that we know what's on the network. We can know how we're communicating in and out, the data flow, correct? But also, the bad guys can take this and actually do reconnaissance on your network, so they can actually not necessarily attack you that day. But if I want to get information about you and make sure that, hey, all right, I'm messing with Macs today because this is a Mac shop. This is a Mac place of business. They only run Macs in there and iPhones, iOS, right? So I need to make sure that I get the attacks, my playbooks ready for Macs, right? Whatever vulnerabilities that may be out for Mac. So this can be a good tool, but also it can be used for bad things as well. So like I alluded to earlier, these type of Nmap scanners can also do kind of a service discovery. So again, showing what type of ports you have open or what type of services that you're using to communicate to other devices on. It can build a fingerprint of how your network is set up, right? And this again is it's good for an administrative point of view, from a high level to see all of your blueprint or your fingerprint of the network, what we call a footprint, right? We can see the footprint of the network and see how data is coming in and out. But at the same time, it's also bad if we someone else knows about that footprint, because the things that we're focusing on today or this week may not be the things that your hacker or your attacker is actually focusing on. So it's kind of, you need to understand when you see traffic spike up, or services kind of degrade down, or they bog out, because when someone's running these type of scans, it can cause printers to actually accidentally just print out gibberish or random sheets of paper, or it could cause different types of PCs to slow down tremendously to the network, right? Because it's actually pinging, seeing that it's up, pulling the information, communicating with it, and that is what we call very noisy, right? So whenever we see a lot of noise on the network, we need to be aware of that, and then do what's necessarily possible to find it and shut that communication off. Another way we can find out different types of PCs that's out there on the network, we can also do a netstat command, and that's showing everything that we have a connection to. And you can pull this command up, and you'll actually see how your PC is actually communicating out to different services, different applications. More importantly, NS lookups is a very important thing as a security professional, because we get to understand. It's kind of hard to look at numbers all day and IP addresses and IPv6 addresses and kind of disseminate what's what, right? But these NS lookups allow us to use those DNS references. DNS stands for domain name service, and it allows us to use that type of service to say it's google.com, and then we can get an IP address of saying that it's 8.8.8.8. I think that's too many eights, but you get my drift, right? So we can use a English version or whatever language you may speak into translating it into an IP address version, so we can actually break things down to see exactly where things are going. Similar to a nmapping tool is your packet captures. So those type of tools sniff the network, and they actually capture all the packets that's going from one destination to another. The one that you'll probably see the most will be Wireshark, and Wireshark sniffs the network, and it pulls down all the packets that you're sending from your PC out to your router. out to your, if you're saying hello to your smart TV, it captures all of that stuff that's on your particular network. And that's why it's so important to, we can use this as a administrative tool and say, okay, we're having network issues here. Let's get the packet sniffer out. Let's see what's actually going on in the network. But we can also use it for bad cases, right? Where someone that is not in your organization can go and take Wireshark to sniff your network to see who is communicating, what IP addresses are being going back and forth, what's the routes we're taking, and it can be used in that field as well. So here's a screenshot of Wireshark in action. Now, in the following slide, I'll show you exactly. I'll give you a screen recording of how we actually go out there and download Wireshark and actually pull some packets off my network. But basically, this is how it goes. It captures all of these packets in real time, and we could take these packets and we can see exactly how they're communicating, and then who they're communicating with. And then in some cases, we can go into the packet and see if they actually have any type of payload within those packets. So it's a good tool to have to do reconnaissance in, but it's also a good tool to have to understand how we can build our network to be as efficient as possible. Now let's stay in that realm of packets moving back and forth, right? So these packets are literally the actual letters, right? When going back to an analogy of having a physical mailbox and then the post office putting mail into your mailbox, right? The mail going into your mailbox are the packets in the computer world, right? So we want to say these packets going back and forth, they are enclosed within an envelope, right? And then within the envelope, we have the actual data that's going back and forth, and it needs to go to the right source, correct? So whenever we have someone tampering with our packets, they can inject things that they want to be in there, and then now we're getting outside activities thinking that we're communicating correctly, and we're being redirected in a certain type of way. So we're getting mail that we are not accounting for, and that's because people can get onto our network and be able to inject types of malicious, let's say, data in order for us to pass back and forth, right? Or to redirect us into a malicious site. So it's very important to understand how replay attacks work, as well as packet injections, to making sure that we are aware and that our users are aware that whenever we see any kind of weird activity on the network, that we're able to react to it in a timely manner. So let's talk about some software that we can actually use to exploit normal activity, getting on to the network and being able to inject some packets or be able to brute force some passwords. The main one that we want to focus in on is Metasploit. Metasploit is a known vulnerability software that can see the vulnerabilities and as well as be able to attack them. They can interject with malicious payloads, and is what a lot of attackers will use to actually break in and perform some of these attacks. So Netcat is a utility feature that we can use to where we can transfer files on the back end and not be discovered from the client's point of view. So it's a good utility to use when administering, but it's also can be a useful utility for a hacker as well. They can also perform port scanning and fingerprinting of that system, as well as they can use it to connect across UDP and TCP connections. A lot of times we see that the problem with vulnerabilities is that they live in a software world, right? Right. So it's your application that's the problem. It's the actual OS, the operating system, that's the problem, or it's your firmware. They may be um, needing updates because they have a vulnerability that need to be met, or it needs to be mitigated in order for you to really kind of work on it securely. So it's very important for us to understand how to update the applications that we have on our network. It's very important to understand that if we have operating systems out there, will the manufacturer actually give you patches for it? And when I say patches, patches are built to bring in security measures for the vulnerabilities that's out there. So it's patching the holes, so to say, right? So will that vendor have that patch ready for you to actually apply to the software that you're actually working on? Um, a lot of firmware that's out there, it goes unnoticed because a lot of times once we boot up a system, we jump past the firmware issues and we go straight into our operating system. And a lot of times an attacker may go and attack the part that we overlooked, that firmware. So we need to make sure that we are up to date on all of our applications, operating systems, and firmware. We also, when it goes back to operating systems, we want to make sure that it's actually up to date and is supported by that vendor. And I would say that'll go for everything, as far as applications as well too. It's a lot of times we may come across a software or an application, and the vendor, the people who actually created it, they're not in business anymore. So how do we go about communicating safely if there's no one doing any research on the back end to let us know that it's vulnerable? So just some things to keep in mind when going out there and looking at different applications, OSs, and such. Just to kind of continue on with that conversation of having software that's out of date. You don't want necessarily a legacy software that's out there and people are just kind of using it because it's worked for so long. Why should we change it? And a good example would be someone operating on Windows XP or Windows 7, Windows 8. And it's just like, hey, we set it up, but there's no problem. We don't have any problems with it. So why should we change it? Well, those are legacy operating systems and they don't receive any patches anymore. So if there's any kind of 0-day vulnerability to it, then they won't have any type of patch to come out and help you out with that. So it's a known vulnerability, and now it's a matter of time before someone can actually exploit that vulnerability. So a 0-day is whenever it's a vulnerability that's is very fresh, right? No one knows of it. It's kind of like the first day that it was actually discovered, and now there's a rush to actually find a remedy for it, or for the attacker side to actually exploit it. Because if I just heard about a 0-day that just happened, well, there's no patches out there to stop me. So if I can get to each and every device as quick as possible to exploit it, I don't have to worry about the patch management stopping my plans. On the flip side, if I was a good guy and I heard about a 0-day, I want to make sure that my vendor or whoever the application is with or operating system is with, is that they have a patch that came out and I'm able to apply that patch as soon as possible. So being able to stay upon, going out, doing your research, making sure that you're staying up on the news to see what type of 0-days that come out, and making sure that you apply your patches. Microsoft comes out with patches pretty much the first Tuesday of every month. And so we want to apply those patches. Now we can go into more granular schemes of putting it in a test field, testing it out, see if it breaks anything, then applying the patch. But for the most part, you want to make sure that you understand patches do come out and they're for that security reason, right? And we just need to stay up on those. We want to avoid weak configurations, right? Whenever we add a new device to our system or our network, sometimes we could just, it's easy just to place the new extender router here, and whatever configuration comes on it, hey, if it works, fine, I don't care, long as it works. But having, those accounts, you sometimes different devices come with default accounts, and sometimes that information of how to log into those default accounts are public, so we can Google those type of what's the admin username and password for a particular router that you have. And so if that information is public and you never change your default account password or account, then it's easy for someone to Google that information, get onto your network, and then go into your devices. So we want to make sure that we have a plan in place to actually change those type of configurations. We want to make sure that we change the passwords to default accounts. Make sure that we configure the settings of whatever device to tailor our business needs, right? And we want to make sure that it doesn't have an overwhelming amount of permissions to do whatever it wants to do on the network. So a good example of that is why not take away everything that it can do and only give it the permission that what it needs to do, right? That way, if someone does get into a router or whatever device that's on your network, it doesn't give them the right to actually go out there and perform some of these things that just need permission in order to execute, right? So let's go a little bit deeper into that. Not only just having default passwords and accounts there, but going into that configuration piece, we want to make sure that we shut down. When I said, in that previous slide to take away things that it can do and only give it the things that it needs to do, we want to shut down different services, different ports that it doesn't need to work on. If we're not going to be doing any type of file transfer, why should I have FTP open? Right? So if it doesn't need to do that, then we need to shut those things down. Different protocols, the way it communicates to other devices. If we have a working knowledge of how we want our devices to work, then we can configure them to actually be more secure by being less, I guess, verbose as far as the things that it can do on the network. Also, setting up different encryption levels when it comes to our passwords, and this is more on the networking side. So if you have like a home router, making sure that we don't use weak passwords and weak encryptions on those passwords to make it easier for one to break in, right? Making sure that we have a standard there. These are different configurations that help us operate in a more secure manner. Now, we have those weak configurations and default passwords still in play, then we run a high risk of letting vulnerabilities be exploited. And these can lead to data breaches. So we all know, or we all have heard of data breaches and how companies have fall victim to these type of attacks, but it's pretty much where confidential data is being transferred without someone's authorization. So that could be malicious, but it also could be, a mistake on someone as well. So you have different aspects of data breaches as far as how data goes in and goes out, but that's why it's important for us to know how it's actually going out and making sure that we put constraints on those things, so it's not happening so easily, right? But also with that, we can also have identity thefts. So we all heard how Experian has fall victim of a data breach where millions of people's personal identity have been leaked out to the dark web. Also, these data breaches, not only do they have, impacts on people's actual data, but it also has kind of like a impact on a company's reputation. How many of you would still go to Nike and buy shoes from their website when they just released that they had a massive data leakage of people's credit card numbers. And, it will damage their reputation as being a secure, responsible company for letting that type of information out. So it's something that we want to stay away from as much as possible, because it can have not only a physical damage to it, but it also can have that intangible, something that we can't touch, something that we more feel about a reputation of a company. So how can third parties play a hand in this? Think about all the third party vendors that you may have in your company. You may work for Wells Fargo, but they may use Adobe Acrobat. Well, Adobe Acrobat is your third party, and Adobe, I'm sorry, not the Acrobat is the actual product that they sell, but Adobe is their third party vendor. And if Adobe is under attack, then you need to make sure that the software that you're using is not a part of that, or what can we do to remediate that vulnerability that may be plaguing your network, because you're um, in a way letting them in because you have decided to use this vendor for whatever service, but now they may be under attack in some type of way. To give another example is if they have if let's say box.com, where it's a online a cloud storage service, if they have personal information of your customers because you're using them to store information on there, and then they have a leakage of your customers, then in turn your reputation is damaged because you chose to go with that company. So it's very important to do research on who you decide to let come into your network, who you're giving your data to, where is that data actually lying at on your third party's software. So let's say go back into Acrobat, not Acrobat, I'm sorry, Google, or let's say Box.com. You can also do Google Drive, but let's say once we transfer data from our network to Google Drive or Box.com, where is it actually sitting at on their servers? Is their servers in Argentina? Is it in Spain? Is it in Africa? Do we have policies? Are we allowed to have our customers' data in those countries? So it's just different things that we need to think about when it actually bringing in third parties, and then what risk do they actually put on us indirectly. So we're going to start talking about security assessment frameworks, and a good place to start is with the NIST SP 800-115, and this is going to give you a bunch of guidelines, procedures, policies to actually take in and apply to your business for whatever reason that you may need it. And it'll give you a good overview of how to get started when it comes to vulnerability assessments, threat hunting, and penetration testing. Now, to break those three things down, vulnerability assessment is just kind of doing a risk management, right? Where we see what type of risks that are out there, what kind of vulnerabilities do we hold in our network against those type of risks, and then what are we going to do to actually manage those risks, or are we going to try to eliminate, mitigate, avoid different aspects like that? So that's vulnerability assessment. Threat hunting is more getting down to we know the threat, we know the risk that holds to that threat and that vulnerability, and so we're going after the elimination of that threat, or we're going to do some reconnaissance on that threat as well. With penetration testing, we're talking about having a outside vendor, or maybe someone who is dedicated on your team to actually probing the network, probing the policies, the things that we have in place, our security framework that we already have in place that's up and running. We're looking to attack that, seeing how to find any kind of faults within our security posture already. So that's penetration testing. So going into vulnerability scanners, we have these things in place in order to scan our network and see what type of devices we have on there, as well as the applications that they're running. And it double checks that application and that OS against a database of vulnerabilities and risks that are out there. And once it gives us a report of how the scan went, we are able to either remediate or to kind of get a better understanding of what type of risk that we are, um, what kind of risks are we up against on a device to device standpoint. And we can also use this type of scanner for OS fingerprinting, as well as seeing what type of firmware vulnerabilities that we may have. Now, when you're having your vulnerability scanner scan the network and it applies those vulnerabilities to the database and it comes back with a report, it will give you a scale on if it's a low risk or a critical risk, right? It's a scale from low to high, and you normally see these things called CVEs, and that's the common vulnerability exposure, and that's kind of the name of the vulnerability that's out there. And then the scoring system will be under the CVSS, which is a common vulnerability scoring system, and you'll normally see it as a scale from 1 to 0. I'm sorry, a scale from 1 to 9, and the lower you are to 1, the more likely you could probably let that vulnerability slide. But the more you're getting up to your 7, 8s, and 9s, then you probably want to make sure that you seek the patch or whatever remediation that they will advise, and then apply it as soon as possible. Now, in some cases, you may want to test this patch out or test the remediation out first before you apply it within a production field or what have you. But to make sure that you don't just put every patch out there, and that's in certain cases. I would advise to always test your patches before you actually apply. When running vulnerability scans, we can have certain things that can cause a lot of problems. And sometimes we can have those scans that where they run smoothly, and these are where you hear the terms intrusive and non-intrusive come into play. So a non-intrusive scan will run fairly smooth. You have credentials, you have permissions to actually run on the network on those endpoint devices, and this is a lot of times where you'll see an endpoint actually sitting on the device itself. So you'll kind of look into your lower right hand corner of your, let's say, Windows PC, and you'll see an icon there that's kind of different, and it may be the icon from the vulnerability scanner that you're running on your network. So there it has the permission to go ahead and scan whatever's there on that box, right? So where a intrusive scan will come from a outsource, it will seem as an outsource source, right? And it's going to be loud and create havoc because it's not supposed to be there, and this can interfere with business processes and slow down the actual scanning process, but it also can slow down the production of a workday. So we want to make sure that we understand what type of scans we're going to do. We're just not going to go and get a vulnerability scanner for our network and then go to scanning, right? We want to test these things out, see how loud it is, how intrusive it is, and then tone it down to where we're able to scan, see our vulnerabilities, but at the same time be productive throughout the workday and work week. So when running vulnerability scans on your network, you have a option of having a credential or non-credential scan. So that means where we can preload those administrative passwords into certain folders or certain documents or applications that's on the network. So whenever the vulnerability is scanning, it doesn't check that part. It has the permission to go ahead and get past the login portion and then scan that folder, which can create a more smoother scan for you and be less intrusive. But it doesn't give you a hacker's point of view, right? So if you have things in place to where that person needs to brute force and a password on that folder or what have you, then it's a lot more louder whenever they're running that brute force type of attack on your network. So therefore, you can have other things come in and swoop in and cancel out that action if necessary. So just kind of things to keep in mind whenever running those type of scans. You want to make it as real as possible, but at the same time keep the business in mind to where if running those type of scans is noisy and it creates issues throughout the business day, you might want to go ahead and make it a credential type of scan to make it less intrusive and make it smooth for the business operations. Now, I did wanted to come and say that the vulnerability scanners are not perfect by no means. They do, from a time to time, have false positives and then false negatives. Of course, we don't want to have false negatives, but we rather tone down the false positives and have no false negatives. So a false positive is that it's something that we are aware of, or it's not a actual problem, but the machine, the system alerts on it, right? Well, false negative is something that is a problem, but the machine doesn't alert on it. So again, far worse than a false positive, even though in some cases you may have a machine that flags a whole bunch of stuff to be a false positive, where that may be annoying. It's still not as dangerous as having a false negative where you don't even know if there's a problem there because it didn't see it as a problem. And so when we put our trust into that type of scan, um, making sure that you have little to no false negatives is very important. So let's go a little deeper into penetration testing, pen test for short, also known as ethical hacking. And that's where you're testing your security posture, like I said, to see what's already there and then actually putting pressure against it, seeing if the configurations are doing their job, right? It's the actual appliance that we put in place. Is it actually blocking anything? Are the credentials that we put here, since we changed it, is it vulnerable to being brute forced? Things of that nature. And a lot of times we have third-party vendors come in and strike a contract with a company and then actually perform a pen test to give them to give the company a better understanding of how the security posture is. So if I have a third-party vendor come in and they could take the position of a outsider, a hacker, right? And be able, if they can go from having nothing to actually being on the network, then they can give us a report after the whole test is over, and then we can go back and say, hey, we need to address these different problems because he was just a normal guy on the street, and now he was on our network looking at all our folders and different type of data that we wanted to keep concealed. So pen testing is a very important part. I would say it needs to happen about at least once a year annually, and it's always since your network, your business is constantly changing. Pen tests are needed on an annual basis in order to shift and form that security posture with it. So staying with the example of a third party coming in, um, and they strike that contract up to say, hey, I'm going to do a pen test for you. They need to set the ground rules of how do we actually engage each other, right? So the rules of engagement may go from the time that they start to what devices and, let's say, servers you can't touch. Will you give them full access? Will you give them credentials to be on the network? Are you going to say, hey, start from the parking lot and work your way in the best way you can? And when I give hard examples like that, when I give the person nothing to work with and actually have them try to get onto the network, that's from a black box standpoint. And when I give them, let's say we bring someone in and then we give them a credential, we give them a username and password, and we just say, hey, you can only stay within this domain, and these are the folders you can only mess with, then I'm giving you more of a white box type of um, gateway into our network. And then a gray box is where I give you some information. Hey, this is our Wi-Fi name, but I don't give you a password. This is our These are our employees. This is what our badges look like. So I'm giving you some information, but I don't give you everything of how to actually get in and then onto the network. That's more of a gray box, right? And so from these different standpoints, it's better to come from a black box standpoint because you get a more accurate report of where you're vulnerable at and then where we can actually make those changes at. The problem is that these vulnerability, these pen tests happen during business hours, and you don't want to lose productivity because we're testing the network, or we're testing policies, or we're testing users, and it causes an inconvenience. So your higher ups may be against that type of training during business hours, but in order to get a real live good sense of it, you might want to have it done during business hours. But that's something that you and your business can sit down and hash out. But on the other hand, some companies have enough money to actually have a penetration team um, within the organization. So that's the only thing they do, is that they break up into these kind of different teams, and then they all are responsible for uh, doing their role. So let's go through the different types of teams that you may see on your pen testers within the company. So you have your red team, and they're going to probably be on a offensive role, that's actually performing the attacks, making sure that, hey, we know where we want to go, we know what our goal is, our flag to capture, so to say, and then we're going to go about attacking the company in this way. Our blue teams is going to be on the defensive side, where, okay, that's going to be probably, pretending to be your security analyst, and so forth, to make sure that they have things in place, defenses set up in order to see the attacks or be alerted of the attacks and then actually react to them. Then you have your white teams. Your white teams are probably going to be your officiators over the whole exercise. So they will have the boundaries of where things can go and how long it can take. Now, again, I'm not a fan of having rules in this type of war because um, in real life, attackers don't care about rules. It's about getting the main objective done. But anyway, I digress. Purple teams will set up the actual collaboration between the two different teams and actually come up with the lesson learns after the fact. So you can have these different teams break up into this one big department, break up into different teams, and we can actually play scenarios of how we can actually see the vulnerabilities and then attack, how are they being attacked, and then what are we doing to remediate. Now, a pen tester might use some of this. Once they get their engagement rules, they may go about doing reconnaissance in different types of ways, right? Um, I think the most popular way is to just do a social engineering attack, where I just kind of take someone out to lunch, or I just have kind of like this water cooler talk within the business about what's going on, and then try to maneuver my way around them to see avenues on where I can get onto the network. You can also do like a scans, like we talked earlier about different scans to create a footprint of the network, and then make your entry that way. We can use open source intelligence, and this is your simple pulling up a web browser, Googling whoever, and seeing how much information is out there. You'll be surprised about how much information you can just find off of a simple Google search, or searching on your favorite social media website. I tell you, a good place to go is LinkedIn. And if you're doing a pen test, why not be able to, look at everybody who works at that place, as well as they'll give you a full rundown on the business profile page. So you could do a lot of reconnaissance there. And then once you have your information of how you want to attack, then we can, you know, go deeper into how to exploit each entryway that's possible, right? And then hopefully, from a pen tester's point of view or from a hacker point of view, one of those things are open, and then it's on to the next level, right? So I want to make sure that when I say that um, hackers and pen testers are looking for one way of getting in, then one way of traversing, and then one way of opening files, when they go from one section to another section to another section, it's kind of like we need to have defenses there for each level that they get to. This is what we call defense in depth. So it's not just having your firewall up in place. It's not just having your networks sectored off in the VLANs. It's not just having your antivirus on your PC. It's having all of these things in different possible places, because you never know where somebody is going to pick up and say, hey, I'm gonna start my intrusion here. So like I was saying before, having that defensive depth will pretty much uh, handle a pen test pretty good, because just like this life cycle where you want to have a foothold to the exploit, you want to actually do some persistence, have that privilege escalation, lateral movement if possible, pivoting if possible. All these things can be remediated if we have certain policies in place, certain configurations in place, and certain infrastructure standpoints in place, to where, you know, it makes a pen tester even more, having his life or her life be even more tougher, because they just can't go and do whatever on the network, and then you really never made it hard for them to, you know, get to the goal of seeing the HR department server. So we need to put things in place in order to eliminate, you know, at least one of these actions, right? Where even if you're able to get onto the network, that I don't need for you to compromise an account and making sure that Gary from the mailroom has admin accounts or admin privileges to where he can see anything that's on the network. So it plays a hand in hand when you start planning for, or you see the reports that come from a pen test, that we can put these things into play, and that we can actually put those things to modify our security posture to become more secure. So in summary, we went over a multitude of things. Thank you for sticking with me on that. But we started off talking about reconnaissance tools such as Wireshark, Nmap, NSLookup, Metasploit. We also talked about patch management, being able to understand our vulnerabilities and then applying patches whenever we have tested and actually need to put out there in the production field. We also talked about different vulnerabilities, not just physical, not just software. Could be social. It could be, when I say social, I mean more people. It could be those are our vulnerabilities. How do we coach up people to have a better security posture and have a better security awareness about them? We also talked about pen testing and the importance of seeing it from a hacker's point of view, and how do we actually put defense in depth in order to make their lives a little bit harder when it comes to getting onto our network and traversing around. So I would say to, you know, go over this section several times over, and I'll see you in the next lesson.